The video will be up on my channel and CSEC Panda's channel in two parts. So for those who would want to rewatch and take extra notes, and for those who would watch after the live, you would be able to see part one. Part one, which you are now seeing on CSEC Panda's channel, where we would have worked through a sample with sample answers, right? And then you would just go over to CSEC English, CSEC English's channel, my channel for part two. Hello, YouTube, my YouTube students. Welcome back to the marathon. We're at the end of the CSEC English A January marathon. We've been doing lots of wonderful things. For those of you who are just tuning in and you missed everything else, you have a lot of videos to watch. We've covered report writing. We've covered tons and tons of essay writing stuff. We've covered 100 tips for English A. Now we're getting into a less popular but similarly important topic, which is paper 3. So good morning, guys. Thank you for being here. We're just at 6 viewers so far, but more will trickle in when the sun, rises up just a bit more, just a bit higher. It's sleepy time for a lot of us. Yeah, that's how it is. Seeing some representation from Caribbean English Zone again. Yeah, Jade Chambers, welcome to the chat. Miss Compton, you've been here. Up like a bee, the first one on stream. Montelinis 17. Oh, yo. Oh, man. Yes. You guys might be able to realize that I am joined on stream by a fellow YouTube teacher this morning, CSEC Panda. We've collabed in the past before, and CSEC Panda is kind of my go-to when it comes to paper 3. My go-to person. I send persons to CSEC Panda when they're asking about paper 3. I usually say it's already there on YouTube. Just click that link, you'll find it. So it's only fitting for me to bring on the person who I send persons to for the paper 3 session as we wrap up the marathon. So welcome, CSEC Panda. Thank you so much for joining me here.
Good morning. Thanks for having me. And for that kind introduction, I'm flattered. I never pictured getting quite so far being a YouTube teacher when I started, but I'm pleased with the journey, I have to say.
Mm-hmm.
So, good morning to your chat and everything. Honestly, I have to say shout out to everybody who was here because I know how early morning can be. Sunday morning, you probably have something that you usually would be doing, rather would be doing, something like that. And taking this time to make sure you've got it locked in for the exam, that's commendable. So congratulations to you guys. So today what we're looking at is a past paper 3 for English A and B. I trust most of you guys are English A students right now, but it would be the same paper that you write if you were doing English B. And so I just want you to be able to see sample answers because there haven't been a lot of sample answers available historically just because this paper is so new. It having only come out in 2018 or 19 for the first time. And so there can be some confusion around what constitutes a good answer to this or what you are expected to do. So I just want to clear that up for you, and I hope that by the time you leave today, you will basically understand what they're expecting from you and what types of answers you will be comfortable giving even before you get there. Just as a spoiler alert or a preview, pretty much all of the skills that you would have used on paper 2, especially paper 2 of English A, but also English B, will just be coming back into place or into play right here where you're doing some reading, you're doing some writing. It's nothing that's too much out of your league. One of the things I also want to emphasize is that there's a lot of time given. 2 hours is the amount of time that they allow you to answer 3 questions, which is more than most people are expecting when it's in
Yeah.
practice. You do have a lot of time left there. A lot of times people finish with time to spare, so it's not something that feels rushed, even though they expect you to be creative. So I think that strikes a good balance. All right, so the first thing that you're going to see when you flip the paper open is this instruction to examine the 3 texts carefully and then answer the questions that follow. I did just copy the instructions over so you can see it here. I'm sorry you can't see the actual format. Maybe we can go through an actual paper after just so you can see exactly how it would be. But essentially, this is what you get, right? So they're going to be these 3 texts that they have for you. And by texts, they can choose either a like an article, as they did at the beginning of this one, or a cartoon. I mean, loosely used a cartoon, which is going on here, or something like a poem, but it's also been things like song lyrics. It's been different like poetry type of stuff in the past, taken from different areas. So a text. The point of it is you're going to have to read this, and then they're going to ask you some questions about it. These questions are largely going to be about you understanding the main ideas that are presented, the formats that's being used, and then they're going to check you for how much you understand about considering an audience when you're presenting something. So it's more so to get a grip on how you would actually be able to use the English skills that you say that you have in an actual scenario that requires it in real life, right? If you're familiar with CSEC and CXE's style of doing things, most of paper threes are about testing your real life abilities as much as they can. So, at the beginning of this, we have this text from a magazine, which maybe you've been able to read by the time. I don't know the kind of resolution you're getting or so, but we could go through it even now because we have some time. Alright, so this says, Down with Casual Fridays. Many working women today are happy that so many businesses have adopted dress down days, or even casual dress all week long. But women shouldn't rejoice. The world's most clever male chauvinists could not have designed a more effective strategy to keep women out of power. For more than 20 years, my company's research on wardrobe has shown that when women dress casually, their authority and competence are more likely to be challenged. In the 1970s, I found that women working in companies with strict dress codes earned almost 1/3 more money than those with the same levels of education and experience in companies where they were allowed to dress casually. When men dress casually, they lose some of their authority. When women do the same, they lose most of theirs. So why ask women to dress for failure? One claim is that it builds team spirit. If everyone wears jeans, including the company president, the change may have a positive effect on corporate culture. However, casual dress codes only break down hierarchies when they are first introduced. Within a year, most people in authority begin to dress more formally to identify their positions. A second claim in favor of dressing down is that employees have to spend less on clothing for work. This argument has a great deal of validity for men. Women stated that they felt the need to buy a new wardrobe since they believed women's casual outfits were more revealing. They felt a need to maintain a professional image. It's up to women to make sure that casual days do not undermine their hard-won clout. Hard-won clout. And this was adapted from a magazine that came out in Glamour, right, in the past. So I've read that. I know we all can read, but that's what you're going to do in the first part of this paper when you're working it out. You're going to read this text, you're going to take it in. Similar to how you would have dealt with a summary writing text, you would want to use the same. Adam, can you see my pointer on screen or
I'm not seeing
no?
the pointer.
Okay, that's fine. But just oops. Let's go back. Keep focusing here. All right. Thank you. Just
Mm.
wondering. Okay, so you see this is a magazine article. You see the style that it's in. The questions that are going to come about this are going to be surrounding what the main ideas were. So from the time you read it the first time, you can get an idea of, okay, where this is going. Seems to be about casual dressing in the business place. And that's enough for now. You don't need to overstress it. And unlike a summary text, which I think people struggle with because it's wordy and contains extra fluff on purpose, this doesn't contain that, so pretty much the impression you get from reading it is what they mean, right? So the second text is not, well, I mean, it depends on what you're good at, as challenging to interpret. It's cartoon. We see Dress Down Friday begins as of next Friday. Picture the following Friday, everybody's dressed down and they're chilling out. And so this is clearly a misinterpretation of Dress Down Day. When I relaxed the dress code, I didn't know posture and productivity would be thrown out. So, I mean, I don't think they expect that to be funny like haha, but your goals are just to be able to assess that this is a type of media and interpret the message in it. That's what they're checking you for. So we have there. And then we have this poem. There's a problem with dress codes, which the English B people will be familiar with interpreting poetry. I don't think this requires deep analysis because most of the questions are surface level, but that's what's going on. When I'm told to cover my body, my clothes are picked apart. It's never for my sake, but for my boy counterparts. When a girl is wearing skirts too short, a teacher will not hesitate to dress code her. Boys will be boys, and girls will accommodate. My body's not something taboo I need to hide. I don't take care of and love my person just to be objectified. Is it really that hard for teachers to say to boys, don't look at girls that way? We're taught self defense, we're taught modesty, we're warned not to talk to strangers, or the end may not be pretty. We're taught to cross our legs and pray to the sky that we don't catch the attention of the wrong guy. Alright, so that was the poem though, and you would realize that what these texts have in common, the theme, and that's what you need to identify, is the idea of what dressing and dress code does to productivity and people's behavior in serious spaces. So at work, at school, etc., and well, gender affairs tied to that. Remember that in this, you also have a lot of room to express your opinion as long as it's tied to fact. So there's no one right way exactly to do this, but you also do want to make sure that you're paying attention to what they actually said. So you're not being too inventive, but at the same time, you have room to display that you are thinking a certain type of way, which is a great way to follow up on the marks that you may or may not have missed out on paper 2 in expression. So definitely bear that in mind. So the first question is going to be asking you to outline the main idea or issue presented in each of the 3 texts. So you definitely need to pay attention to the idea of each here when they say that, meaning that they are going for 3 responses technically. And when you see it broken down on the lines on the paper, they've gotten better at the formatting, so it's easier to tell. But just definitely go through the instructions and see where they want you to talk about each of these things, or sometimes they only want you to talk about 1 or 2. So you don't want to waste time doing stuff that is not required, so read the instructions, and that will help you a lot. All right, so the main idea presented in the article is that there's a difference in the treatment of women versus men in the workplace when they dress more casually. The women are treated with diminished respect compared to their male coworkers. Full stop. In the cartoon, it is suggested that when given the opportunity to dress casually at the workplace, workers may abuse the freedom, resulting in lackadaisical performance. And in the poem, the speaker suggests that much emphasis is placed on teaching girls to conform to various social conventions regarding their behavior and dress codes in order to avoid negative attention from boys. However, it seems the boys are hardly ever taught to simply respect girls. Okay, so you definitely, that last sentence, or second to last that I have there, is kind of a run-on sentence, and you would want to avoid doing that. But otherwise, you're free to express your opinion, as I say, as long as it's factual. So I've provided a main idea for each of these three texts, which is the first thing that they want to know. And um, there's going to be this idea of making sure that the idea that you extract in the beginning is sufficiently clear that you can rely on the response that you gave here and continue building on it down the road, because they do ask you to do that. So that's pretty good. We could probably pause at this point because I've just been going on. Make sure that nobody has any questions.
If you guys have any questions, now is a chance. We've looked at one question so far, worth 6 marks.
Mm-hmm.
So,
All
what do you
right. I
guys think of
always
the response?
like to think that when there aren't questions, it's because the explanation has been thorough. It would be good if I could change this page to landscape, but I am not seeing the option to do so.
All right. Yeah, maybe it can't be helped.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Maybe it can't be helped. But I'm looking I'm watching on a reduced screen size, and I'm still able to read. So I trust everyone else is able to read as well.
All
And
right. I certainly hope so.
yeah. And for you guys who love to watch everything on your phones, um I would recommend, when you're watching CSEC videos in general, if possible, use your computer or tablet, because there's usually text, right? And you don't want to miss anything. You want to be able to be in one spot. You're not, scrolling through other apps while watching educational videos and so on. So if you're on a reasonably sized screen, I think it's fine. So I wonder, Panda, if we could just go through the vocabulary you used to answer this first question, and perhaps those who are anticipating this paper can grab a couple of nice words or techniques, and
Definitely.
make some notes.
Right. So just because this is still another component of the same exam, and you definitely see that they were asking for you to use good spelling and vocabulary and punctuation and so on paper two, you are displaying the same skills here for best effect, right? So I did try to use vocabulary that was appropriate fitting at my level and a bit better, just so that I could score some points in that area. So I always advise people not to go out of their depth, because it's
Mhm.
worse to use, vocabulary that you're not comfortable with than it is to just use what you're comfortable with and make it make sense. So in this particular thing, I went with the idea of there's a difference in the treatment of women versus men in the workplace when they dress more casually. Again, I would recommend that before you begin to expound on that, you definitely make sure that you've expressed the idea and they have an
Mhm.
answer to the question, because that's important. Just because you get 6 marks for answering these 3 points of this question, it's sounding like they would have given you 2 marks for each answer.
Yeah.
And that's usually a good clue to go in a little more in depth than just putting like a word, a single word. Some people do that, and it's not what they're looking for. So you want to expound a little bit more.
Yeah.
So
My
on my
my
second, yeah,
Yeah, I was just saying, my rule of thumb is one complete sentence per mark that you're looking for. So if you're looking for 2 marks per element, then 2 sentences per text would be appropriate, I think. So you just state the main point, and then a little bit of support, and then I state the main point, a bit of support, main point, support, and I
yeah,
think I think you could get 6 marks if you do that well.
yeah, and I think it definitely helps as you're going along to give you more understanding of the text as you explain it back. So, you know, when you come to needing to expound later on, it's easier, and so you benefit yourself by going a little more in depth. And that full, complete sentence per mark is a good um, yardstick to begin with. Okay, so on
Mm-hmm.
my second sentence here, I went in to explain what I mean by difference in treatment in the workplace. The women are treated with diminished respect compared to their male coworkers, right? Diminished, as you can see, is a word that I could have gone around in a different way, but it's also a great time to put that in there, so I did. In the cartoon, it suggested that when given the opportunity to dress casually at the workplace, workers may abuse the freedom, resulting in lackadaisical performance. That's my dad's word, though, lackadaisical. But as it turns out, it's completely a legitimate word, and I just threw it in there for some flavor. You know, vocabulary is the spice of writing at this point, so I went
Mm-hmm.
for it. Okay, and so in the poem, the speaker suggests that much emphasis is placed on teaching girls to conform to various social conventions regarding their behavior and dress codes in order to avoid negative attention from boys. Right, so that's my actual answer without expounding too much, and I stuck in a little more vocabulary there. I do that because I'm able to without discomfort, and again, if you are, I invite you to. And also because you have like 40 minutes to answer this, part A, part B, and part C, which isn't that much work to do, you can take your time a little bit more and, you know, go in for the vocabulary that creates the effect that you want, which often, if you think a little bit, you get that. Um, just because you have that room to think, right? And however, it seems that boys are hardly ever taught to simply respect girls.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the thing. And that would bring us to 6 marks. And so we've concluded part A of that.
Yeah, and
Um,
just to address this comment here, Panda,
yeah.
from Miss Compton, just highlighting a common mistake it seems is students writing one sentence that they think, one statement that they think appeal to all three pieces. So they wouldn't be able to get 6 marks for a singular statement.
Oh,
If it's
yes.
worth 6 marks, one statement, there's no way in any exam you're going to get 6 marks for a sentence. So you can't just write one sentence that you think would cover all three, because the question says outline the main idea or issue present in each of the three texts, not the main idea common to all three, the main idea presented in each. So each text would have a different main idea, but they would share a theme, right? So the theme here is, that dress code in relation to gender and productivity, but each text is highlighting a different like sub theme, right, or a different topic under that theme, a different idea or discussion point, and that's what you need to figure out. And notice that Panda didn't just tell what the theme was and left it up to the marker to interpret the meaning. You tell what the theme is, or tell what the main idea is, and then you tell us what it means to show that you understand, right? Because if Panda had just said the main idea presented in this article is that there's a difference in the treatment of men versus women when they dress more casually. Now, Panda would need to um, tell us what that means to show that she understands what the difference is. The difference is the women are treated with diminished respect compared to their male co-workers. Or the word counterparts would have been my choice, but co-workers is just as good. So be pay attention to how many marks a question is worth, and use that to guide you in terms of how much effort you need to put into it in order to secure those marks, right? So if something is worth 3 marks, then maybe 3 or 4 sentences will be fine. If it's worth 6 marks, you're gonna need a strong paragraph, attacking each element of the question, right? Yes.
Right, definitely. I agree with that. Um, yeah. Yeah, and I mean, definitely look out for those clues because you could shoot yourself in the foot for, like in this particular question, as many as 4 marks you could just lose to not
Whoa.
realizing that they were going in for, let's talk about each of these and with
Mm-hmm.
some details. So you've successfully covered that first part. You've gotten 6 marks out of the 15 that are available for each of these 3 questions. And now you're moving on to part B, where they want you to choose one. Make sure you underline this when you're doing it. One of the 3 texts and assess the appropriateness of that text you have chosen for the purpose of communicating the ideal or issue. So, looking at appropriateness is what we're zooming in on, and appropriateness for communicating the ideal issue. Again, this is where if you were clear about the ideal issue in the previous question, you look right back here. Usually I just choose whichever of these is easiest to expound on because why give yourself trouble that you don't need? But for
Mm-hmm.
your benefit, I just answered each of these with a potential um, answer, right? And so for the article, I said, I believe that the article was a good medium for exploring the ideal of the discrepancy in professional respect based on gender and dress style because it made use of statistics and research to prove the seriousness of the issue,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's a compound idea there. And I know it was only worth 1 mark, but one, it answers the question, and two, going in on the ideal as if you understand what's going on is going to work better for you because, as you can see, they're looking for some analysis here. So you want to give them what they're looking for, like analyze it, right? Now, I chose to start these with I believe, just to pick up the slightly more conversational and analytical tone, um, just because of the forum that we're in at the moment, but you can do anything that you want though. But remember, you just want to talk about why you think the appropriateness of the text was there for the ideal issue. Sometimes you might have to extend and stretch your mind a little bit because you may not have an opinion, honestly, here or there too much, but if you dig in a little bit more, you can find something to say. So I could have also said as an alternate answer, because we just wanted to talk about one text, I believe that the cartoon was an appropriate way to express the ideal that workers may grow lax on the job if allowed to dress casually, because it's a light and humorous way to draw the viewer's attention to a serious but possibly overlooked perspective on the matter. Right? Alternate answer for this? I believe that the poem was a clever choice for addressing the issue of the overwhelming and restrictive social training given to girls versus boys, because the many stanzas given to girls' rules versus the one line written to boys illustrates the points plainly. So, to go in a little bit on what I was looking for here, they say, okay, why was an article appropriate for communicating the idea? I'm like, all right, article. I mean, article begins to give the idea that maybe something was analyzed a bit more before it was presented, or it was meant to be seen in a serious way that it made it to being a whole article in the newspaper. So I just let that lead me into um, choosing statistics as the, I don't want to call it literary device, but the device used, because I know that that's a part of what they're assessing as well. So when I talked about the cartoon, why did I think that was appropriate? I said humor because humor cartoon, that's probably what they were going for and what they were believing that they were putting forward. So I told them kind of what they wanted to hear. Okay, the cartoon, sure, it uses humor and it balances the seriousness with, humor. Cool. And then the poem, if you even look back at it, you see that there was a lot of repetition built into the idea of we're told this, we're told that, we're told the other, and then they make this contrast of the one line that doesn't even get said to boys downhill. So on some light analysis, I thought there was enough repetition that I chose to make it about the formats beginning to illustrate the idea that girls get all these rules and boys don't. So I did it. And just want you to notice that I used a few different ways to say this: a good medium, an appropriate way, a clever choice.
Mm.
So you understand that you have, ways that you could express yourself. Again, whatever makes you comfortable, whatever you would instinctively do, just do your most polished version of that, and you should be good to go. All right.
Yeah.
And so you would have collected another 3 marks for that
Easy.
single. Yep. So
Yeah.
those were some easy marks. You don't want to leave those behind. Definitely go in on those a little bit more. That answer.
Yeah.
Get those 3 marks.
If I can interject a little, Panda,
Yeah.
before we move on, I I like to find patterns or formulas in answers, right? Because I think this helps the students who are more who need a structure to work with. So I think the structure you have developed here, something I find in all three responses, and just to
Mhm.
reiterate, you wouldn't use all three, right? Panda is just showing us three examples, one from each text, but you would just choose one, as the question says. But the three parts of the answer I can see here is one, you tell us that it's appropriate. I don't think it would be a good idea to say it's not appropriate, even though they say assess the appropriateness. The assumption is you will tell us why it's appropriate. Don't say it's inappropriate. Full stop.
Mhm.
You can't get 3 marks for that. So you will agree that yes, I believe this article was a good choice, a good medium. It was appropriate. It was fitting. Whatever the case is, just tell us that it was a good choice. That's part one, right? Maybe I get 1 mark for that. I don't know how the mark scheme looks. The second thing is you mention a technique or a device that text uses, or that medium uses to to be effective. For example, if you look at the first Panda's first answer, I believe that the article was a good medium for exploring the idea of the discrepancy in professional respect based on gender and style because it made use of statistics. So statistics would be the reason why this was an appropriate choice. If we look at the second answer, I believe that the cartoon was an appropriate way to express the idea that workers may grow lax on the job if they're allowed to dress casually, because it is a light and humorous way. So the humor is the device here. If you look at the third one, I believe that the poem was a clever choice for addressing the issue of the overwhelming and restrictive social training given to girls versus boys, because many stanzas given to the girls rules versus the one line. So in this case, it's like the structure of the poem being used as that technique. So in each answer, there are three things. One, tell me that it's appropriate. Two, tell me a technique or device or a piece of appropriateness. Why do you think it's appropriate? And three, Panda also gives us the effect of that device. So look at question one again. Look at answer one. I believe that the article was a good medium. That's part one, for exploring the idea of blah blah blah, because it made use of statistics. That's part two, to prove the seriousness of the issue. So one, it's appropriate. Two, it uses this device. Three, this device has this effect. This is why the device is used. Look at answer two, sample two. I believe the cartoon was an appropriate way, that's part one, to express the idea that the workers may grow lax on the job if allowed to dress casually, because it is a light and humorous way, that's part two, to draw the viewer's attention. So this is the effect. Draw the viewer's attention to a serious but possibly overlooked perspective on the matter. Look at the third sample. I believe that the poem was a clever choice, that's step one, for addressing the issue of the overwhelming and restrictive social training given to the girls versus boys, because the many stanzas given to the girls rules versus the one stanza written to the boys. So we get the stanzaic structure as the technique illustrates the point clearly. And in this case, the point was given before the technique. But in all three answers, I can see one, you tell me that it's appropriate. Two, you tell me what technique or device makes you think it's appropriate. And three, you tell me what this device does in terms of the effectiveness of the writing or how it impacts the reader. So don't just say, yeah, the poem is an effective medium. No. Tell me that it's effective. Tell me the device that makes you think it's effective, and tell me what that device does to allow you to understand the topic better or relate to the topic better. Right? So if you're struggling to find a kind of formula or format, just remember those 3 points. If I hit those 3 points, I'm gonna hit the 3 marks. And the other thing I wanna look at quickly is
Mhm.
Miss Compton's question here. Um, uh, they can they also make reference to the audience when discussing the appropriateness? Definitely, you can
Yeah.
mention that this will be effective in this particular audience, or this would uh, this, for example, if you're looking at music, let's
Hmm.
say a song, and the audience is a younger audience, you could say, songs or music is a way in which younger persons easily consume information, whatever the case is. But you
Hmm.
can mention that this is related to the audience. It's a good fit, right? What if the audience of the texts are literature students? It's a thing about literature students. Then you
Hmm.
can say, oh, the poem is effective because it would relate well to that particular audience, right? What if the audience is a more, let's say, mature middle age audience? The newspaper article, you could say, okay, this kind of audience would relate to that medium a little bit more a little bit easier, a little bit more easily.
Hmm.
So you could mention the audience in the effect. I think it's better to give too much information than to give too little on
That
all of
is
these
true.
questions.
And Ms. Compton, I do have to say, when I originally started doing these papers and stuff, I thought these questions would have been more um, about the audience, because when they ask about the appropriateness of the text, like I might have thought, I mean, it's true, it's a text also, but as Adam was saying, if they had something like, okay, it was a meme or a TikTok video or something,
Mm.
and the presentation of this would appeal to a young audience because that's who they were going for, to me, that would have been like a question about the appropriateness even more. But I don't see that coming out. I don't know if it's because CXC maybe it's a little old fashioned also, or maybe, I don't know. But definitely focusing on the
Mm.
audience is a valid thing to do. I tend to keep it around the um,
The device.
device and the literary thing,
Mhm.
just because I know, like, when they overlap English A and English B, they're probably looking for something in that direction. But in terms of actual practicality, don't neglect the audience. I think that's a great idea to talk about how it would affect the actual readers or what have you. So, yeah.
Yeah, especially if you can see a clear correlation between the medium and the audience. If you can't find a relationship, then you could just deal with the device. It's still a valid answer. But if you can figure out a way to connect the audience to the device, for example, what if the articles were about um art art school or museums or art galleries, and you
Hmm.
mention you talk about the effectiveness of a cartoon or a painting. Clearly you could talk about how that particular audience would relate to that piece of work, or this medium would resonate more with this group because of XYZ. That's still a way to measure the effectiveness. So I don't think you have to choose audience or device. If you can put all the eggs in there, you're just making sure you get the 3 marks for sure. You get the 3 marks for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Um, I no, actually talk about that a bit later. All right, so we would have successfully gotten the 3 marks for Part B, and that would be, so you're 100% welcome, Miss Compton. Uh, that would be 9 of the marks out of the 15 available that would be in the bag. So now for Part C of this same question one, we're looking at for 2 of the text given, and again, I cannot stress enough that it's great to zoom in on how many things and which things they want you to answer, literally underline it or box it off, because the focus can shift even in the moment, right? So for any 2 of the texts given, choose one language technique used in each text and explain its effectiveness. All right, so I chose 2 of the texts, and I chose the article and the poem. Um, just because I chose those. Nothing was wrong with the cartoon, but I genuinely found these easier to work with because I don't read pictures so well, so that's why I did that. So I chose to say that the technique used was statistics. And this was also just kind of doubling down on the answer that I could or would have given in the previous section. Statistics again, no reason to reinvent the wheel, so I just went with that. So the references to statistics research help substantiate, which is a big word, but you also just said prove, so I put the two options there. The references to statistics research help to substantiate the author's claims or the claims made in that article, and to move them away from being a matter of opinion towards being taken as a serious factual issue that requires social attention. Um, Remember here, they're assessing effectiveness of the technique used, because I quote unquote dug this hole for myself of zooming in on the fact that they use statistics. You're now looking at, well, why is that effective? So I'm saying it introduces seriousness, because otherwise it'd be like, if you really zoom out and think about this a lot, which you may or may not have time to do in the actual exam, but let's just do it now. Somebody might be like, what's the big deal? She wore a short skirt to work, like, what is the issue with that? And it's something that could easily get brushed off because why does it matter? But this person has, the author of the article, they've chosen to make it a whole thing that might affect careers, and it's like a whole 20-year research that this company has done on wardrobe, which is a lot more than, wow, there was a low cut top one time. Okay, this person is going in on what is the effect of this particular issue. It clearly matters to them, or for some reason they think that it's, let's say, a big deal. So the idea, back to the actual answer, right, of saying that statistics helps to make it seem like a big deal because they've actually been watching this for a while, they're watching trends, they've seen over time what it actually does. I feel like that stood out, and the fact that it introduces seriousness, I'm like, okay, that was a good answer. So that was the idea, and this was a presentation now. Again, because they were talking about getting 3 marks for this, total of 6 marks, but 3 marks for each of these, I went with the same type of format just to be clear. They do have, the space for you to literally write the title of the text, the technique that was used, and the effectiveness, so it's not as implied, it's just you get to state it exactly like that on the paper, which is good. But I go with the same idea of the references to statistics are good because they help to move them away from being a matter of opinion. So you always want to have that kind of, this is my answer and here's why type of answer supporting detail structure. Even if it's not explicitly asked for, it's always helpful for even just putting your ideas down effectively. So that was my answer, and I believe that would have fully captured those 3 marks for that first part of C. And so for the second piece of this, the title of the text was the poem that I chose as problem with dress codes. And so repetition is the technique I chose. I think that there were quite possibly, I think maybe rhyme could have been in there and other stuff, but once I identify a device and it's pretty obvious, again, I don't like to reinvent the wheel or start, reaching too far, because that's, in my experience, how you get into problems. So I just went with repetition. Of course, I had to prove that now. So I say, by repeating word taught, the poet draws the reader's attention to the seemingly endless list of lessons the girls receive on comporting themselves correctly, while the severe lack of corresponding training for boys is normalized. Right? So I got my vocabulary in there. Okay. Comporting themselves correctly and so on. And I kept referencing the idea, which literally when I was doing this, I went back to Hale in B, where, well, and even earlier on in section A of this, where you can just keep copying the same thing that you said was the idea that you saw, and just keep it coming down the line. So when I got to this stage, and we're looking at the effectiveness, I'm like, repetition is used to hammer that point home that girls are taught this, we're taught this, we're taught this, we're taught this, and boys are taught basically nothing, which is I think a great way to show the connection that's happening in your minds to the examiner, that you see the repetition. If you did English B, this would be easier to spot for you. But you see the device of repetition, you see that it has been used, but you also see why it has been used, and you see one of the potentially many effects that it has on the audience or reader or what have you by delivering the message. And I think that's the most golden thing that will have the examiner salivating to give you as many marks as possible, just because that's what they were going for. So there we have it. That is the completion of question 1, where essentially they want you to assess, just remember this underlined part here, the main idea. The next question is about the appropriateness of the type of medium that was used. And then the next question is about the language techniques. So that's what you're going for there. They're all things that you would be familiar with, having already done paper 2, and any English studies at all. It's not that hard to reach and get that going, right? So now in the second
Sorry, Panda.
question.
Before we move
Oh
along,
yeah, I should ask
um,
comments, yeah.
before we move along, I just wanna identify the trends and patterns, right, in your answers. So, in the second section where they ask about the effectiveness of the device, we do see that the questions are building on the previous questions, right? That should be obvious by now. Your answer for question 1 leads into the answer for the next question, leads into the next one. So if you mess it up from the beginning, you're gonna have a hard time recovering. Make sure you don't skip steps. Make sure you don't, mess up the first question, because you can just piggyback on that and continue talking about the same topic that you would have identified. Anyway, that was a tangent. For the effectiveness of the devices, I just now, while looking at your answers, I came up with 3 main like types of effects that we could look at, right? There might be more. I'm sure there are more, but I think these 3 are easy to fit across any device. 1 is emotion, 2 persuasion, 3 clarity. So when you get a device, for example, the repetition or the statistics, or whether it's another device like imagery, metaphor, whatever the case is, I think the effectiveness can zone in on either the emotion, the emotional impact that it would have. I think repetition is used, or this particular metaphor is used because it would evoke a certain emotion in the reader, emotional appeal. Persuasion, maybe techniques, for example, even repetition could be used to add a more persuasive element, so that the audience would be more likely to believe what is being said. And 3, clarity. Some devices might be used just to make a point more obvious to the reader, to the audience, just clearer. And even repetition could also do that. If something is repeated, it becomes emphasized, and emphasis leads to clarity. If we're paying attention to it, it becomes clearer, right? So I think we can look at these 3 main umbrellas: emotion, persuasion, clarity. When you find the device, think about, okay, does this device make something more emotive? Does it make something more persuasive? Or does it make something clearer? Right? And then it's like you have 3 big options to choose from. So if you're in the exam and you're like, okay, I found the device, but I have no idea what the effective, just think emotion, persuasion, clarity. It has to fit one of those 3. And that way it can just match, which of the 3 would be most appropriate, and you might be good to go. So I got those ideas looking at Panda's answers. I think those might be 3 broad possibilities, for like the effect of that device. Yeah, just in case you're looking for more, patterns and formulas, guys. That's what I'm trying to pick out here. Yeah.
Yep, for sure, for sure. Yep. Because that's important in terms of kind of understanding why you're doing what you're doing, like that. I did see a question here about repetition and effectiveness. I think, if I'm understanding correctly, I think that's exactly what I tried to do. For any two of the texts given, choose one language technique. So I chose repetition used in each and explain its effectiveness. So for me, my answer to effectiveness was that it draws attention to the issue, which, in my opinion, was all this stuff the girls are taught versus boys being taught nothing.
So that goes back to clarity, right?
Yeah.
Just making
So
that particular point
yeah.
more
So
evident.
so you were saying there's clarity, there's emotion, and what was the next thing?
The
The
persuasion.
persuasion. Yeah. Yeah.
There might be others, but I think I would just stick with those three. I'm pretty
Hmm.
sure no matter what device I encounter, it's gonna fit one of those. Statistics, I mean, I'm gonna be more easily persuaded if there's factual evidence, right? If
Yeah.
there are certain kinds of metaphors and imageries, then maybe uh, that might have an emotional appeal, and that might allow me to care about the issue more. Stuff like repetition, and maybe if there are visual elements, then that might make certain things clearer or easier to understand. So
Hmm.
yeah.
For sure. Um. Definitely. So we still see our texts here. We are still assessing them. Now we're going to look at them again through the lens of audience consideration as we continue into the second question. So, second question asks, in making a presentation, it's important to consider the composition of the audience, right? I don't know if this question is always exactly the same, but I've seen it literally repeated like this a few places, so
Mm.
you could pretty much bank on something like this happening. They ask you to explain three other factors which a speaker must consider when making an oral presentation. So you're making a speech, you're considering the audience. One of the things that you would be considering is the composition of the audience, who it's made up of, who are you talking to. So, what other three things can you think of that should be considered when you're making the speech or when you're writing a speech or you're going to do that? I never know exactly what they are looking for in this moment, so I try to go broad and hope that I, like some real scattershot, I hit the area hoping. So I said, in addition to audience composition, the speaker should consider the presentation tools available to them, their allotted time slot, and the level or pre-existing knowledge or vocabulary that their listeners possess. Right? You also could have said, so I just put some other options in brackets, the opinions that the audience already holds, so like if they already have a bias or anything like that. Um, Also, things like speaking volume, and also there's just a bunch of other stuff. Any quality of your audience that could affect how they receive your message, or looking at it the other way around, anything about your message you could change to better affect your audience, to me, is fair game for answering this question. So that's what I went with though. I chose tools, time slot, and vocabulary, but you literally could have chosen some other thing like their age or some other demographic factor, because that's just basically what we're looking at here. What is an audience and what effect will you have on them? To me, is the thing. This was giving 6 marks, which is a lot, in my opinion,
It's a lot
right?
of
So
marks.
it really
I
is.
I would, just to be on the super safe side, add like a one sentence rationale for each, just because that 6 mark thing is kind of scary. Like, man, that's 6 whole marks.
Hmm.
So I might say, and this is just a matter of my preference. In addition to audience composition, a speaker should consider um but then let me see, consider the presentation tools available to them, and then I might add something like um tools can be used. I don't know. Just one line that's like, okay, what kind of tools, or what could the tools do? The available time slot. If more time is available, then more content can be covered in more detail. pre-existing knowledge or vocabulary. Um, yeah, I'd probably, because I mean, I think you answered the question technically well.
Mhm.
You answered exactly what they asked. But I mean that's an overpriced question. Why 6 marks for that?
I mean, I never was too completely sure about this, but I know that there is this concept as explained in the syllabus.
Yeah.
When they say describe something or explain something or summarize
Mm-hmm.
something, there's a certain depth of answer that they're going for. With them saying explain three other factors and with 6 marks, which is a lot, I
Mm-hmm.
suspect that they may have wanted or may have been okay with you going in more detail here. On the other hand, I like to be practical in terms of answering things. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes
Mm-hmm.
the practicality in the moment is this is what you can do, this is what time allows, this is where your brain will let you get to. So I always do try to prioritize actually putting down an answer that
Yeah,
answers
for
the
sure.
question. Um, and if you have the ability to expound on it, then definitely do that. Here,
Mm-hmm.
even if I didn't point by point expound, I probably could have put one sentence at the end of that that kind of wraps it around, say like because all of these factors would affect the persuasion level that a presentation could have on an audience, or just something to include more words and more. Yeah, I understand what you're talking about in there, and I think that would
Mm-hmm.
be, valid. All right,
Mm-hmm.
so so this is what I put. Um, so continuing on the theme of considering the audience, we now have this question B, or part B of question two, that starts
By,
at
by the by the way, Panda,
yeah,
sorry for cutting
mhm,
again.
no
This is
problem.
an answer that you can actually premeditate in anticipation of this question, because regardless of the texts that you get, you can go into the exam thinking, okay, I can talk about presentation tools, time slot, and vocabulary. Those three can be in your mind prepared. So that takes a little bit of guesswork out, because I'm not seeing where they're tying this question to any of the particular text or the theme. It's just a matter of we're looking at presentation on a whole. When you're presenting orally, what are some things you need to consider where audience is concerned? You can't just go into the exam with 3 or 4 answers, prepared, kind of memorized in case you get that question, and that would be like the 6 easiest marks on the paper. Yeah, I think so.
That is true because I think also as this tends to repeat this particular question, you could premeditate a response to this and it would work out fine. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, giving a little reason, yeah, for each factor. That definitely seems like something. And I mean, depending on how you even just structure your responses, you could slip that reasoning in there with just 3 or 4 words more, and it might not even affect the space.
Hmm.
We could take a look at the actual paper after so you can see what you have to work with, but
Yeah, that would be
expounding
good.
more when they ask you to explain something is always going to be the better option. I mean, if you have other constraints in the actual real life moments, then yeah,
Hmm.
but that's what's up. All right, so we're about an hour in. I think we haven't had that many questions so far. Again, I like to imagine it's because the explanation has been thorough enough. So we would be looking at the second part of the second question at this point. If you were asked to make an oral presentation based on the main idea or issue in the three texts, they want you to list 3 points that you would discuss during that oral presentation. All right, so the main idea or issue in the three texts. I wasn't able to determine whether they wanted you to quote unquote summarize the main idea that's common to all three of the texts and then just list 3 points you discuss on that, or if they were
Hmm.
also looking for a main idea of text one, text two, text three, and we're expecting you to list a point for each of those. Or whatever it was, I just did an answer that would cover both. So I said, I discussed the hidden misogyny in the workplace based on clothing styles, the effects of the dress code on office productivity, and the need to begin training school-age boys on their conduct towards their female peers. As I say, I literally do not know which they preferred, if they wanted one main idea over the whole thing, which might have been more like the effect of dress codes on places of business and work based on gender. Something more along that line is a more umbrella idea. But based on 3 points, I think this works as well. And again, sometimes behind the scenes, I believe they really just want to see that you extracted the issue that was being discussed. So I think this would have worked well for that either way.
I think so too, yeah.
Right? And you get 3 marks for that, so no need to go any more in depth. So that was pretty cool. All right, so we are at the halfway point in terms of time, as we were expecting. So I do want to see if we need any breaks or if we need any questions that need asking, or let's see. I think the focus is on the common topic or theme, my interpretation. Yeah, I think that's probably effective. Oh, correct. A couple of other papers that I've seen, like there was one where they were talking about the environment in 2021, I believe. That made me think that they wanted a common topic or theme. So, yeah, dress code in this particular moment. And I guess the effects, because the gender thing is seen in the definitely the gender concept here in terms of dress code is here. I don't think I see any gender issues in the cartoon, and well, again, it's definitely in the first text. So I find that's a wide net to cast, honestly. It's kind of like back to summary writing where they're like, let's get the 5 main points, and there's so many points in here, you're like, well, which ones are in fact the main points? But I mean, definitely do what you can. All right, so now we continue to C. We're asking, in terms of audience consideration again, think of a group of persons who may be interested in the issues outlined in the oral presentation in 2B. Right, that was the question just before. And now you want to list 3 characteristics of the group to which the presentation would be made, and 3 techniques that you would use to keep the group interested in the presentation. So at this point, you can see, especially for 6 marks, that you technically have 6 answers to give here. So just to think about what the actual question is, 3 characteristics of the group that you're making the speech to, and 3 techniques you'd use to interest them. So I said I think the interested group might be high school teachers, human resource managers, and other professionals who are trying to improve the code of conduct in their fields. It may be a balance of males and females. They may be degree holders. And I'd use relevant statistics, anecdotal evidence, and audiovisual tools to make the presentation engaging. Now, to explain what I did here, usually when I interpret CXC as casting or using a broad brush, I use a broad brush back in my answer because I'm just trying to hit what they're trying to get me to understand here. So because my interpretation of here and B was these 3 points, which I spread across the 3 texts, misogyny in the workplace based on clothing style, that's how I came to talking about these human resource managers and professionals, because if I'm making a speech about this issue to an audience that's apparently interested in this issue, then you could picture it being people in the workplace or somebody who could see this is a concern in my life. Why is this a concern? Maybe you're an HR manager, maybe you're a professional, maybe you are wondering what do you wear to work? I don't know, but at this point, they're asking me to use my imagination, so I'm kind of doing that. All right, another one of the things I said was the effect of dress codes on office productivity, so that's an overlap again with this professionals I do. High school teachers, because again, the school-age boys and the conduct towards female peers, I think that speaks for itself. And that is how I came up with that. Now, specifically, to talk about the attributes of this audience that I was assessing, I said you could do profession, gender, education level. That's what I chose here. but also age, backgrounds, maybe like political opinion, financial standing, hobbies, any of these attributes that the audience could have had, especially as a group, that may have affected why you're using these techniques. It's a thing. They might have been going for something like, if the audience was just young, tech savvy, and uh, let's say they had a short attention span, you could have said that you would use, again, the format like a social media post. You could have said you'd have used popular music or some type of meme format or like engagement via a smartphone. Any of those things to me, because there's no set like list of, okay, these are the things that matter. Any of those things would have been fine for this. I chose, just because I chose these serious people, I'd use statistics, anecdotal evidence, and audiovisual tools to make the presentation engaging. And again, I think that that would have been reasonably effective, right? Let's see, question one already dealt with the main idea for each piece. Yeah, probably they're looking for an umbrella thing. Right, so at that point, we covered question one and two, where we finished talking about the main ideas in question one and assessing your literary understanding. By question two, we assessed your audience consideration powers. And now in question three, they ask for an actual response, right? So last question is worth 15 marks in one, and it gives you probably the greatest amount of freedom, maybe anywhere across this entire exam, honestly. They ask you to create a response based on one of the points in 2B above. On other papers, I see it's one of the points that you identified in this first part here. So one of the main ideas of these three texts. Oops. But they ask you to create a response based on, excuse me, one of the points that were used above, and you are allowed to use drama, poetry, lyrics to a song or prose, and they're going to assess your response for quality in one word. Okay, so specifically, relevance of the content, organization of ideas, effective use of language, vivid word choice, and unique voice or style. I feel like unique voice or style would kind of be there for you because you do what you do. Vivid word choice is, again, vocabulary, effective use of language. I mean, my tip for this is don't say anything that doesn't have to be said. Organization of ideas, always important. Relevance of content. Now, I shouldn't say most people, because people are comfortable with different things. For some reason, at this point, maybe because of the level of stimulation in my brain, I usually and have historically chosen to do a poem. Maybe I'm just being lazy. It's the lowest word count I can think of that's still acceptable, but I usually go with that. I've seen other people just do an essay because they feel comfortable with that. A song is basically in the poem zone. Somebody asked the other day for the first time if they could do, or about the drama, which, yeah, is the first thing that you can use here. So you technically could have written like a little play or a skit, short type of thing here that um, answers the thing. For a poem, how many stanzas should it have? I think three is the minimum. So that's what I did here, and I managed to get the point across, and I think it's pretty cool. The nice thing about this is they don't actually regulate you on that. So, I mean, hypothetically, if you wanted to make a poem that's just one stanza, or if it's a haiku or something, I guess you could do that because they gave you the ability to do whatever you want to do. For me, I would say that it is best to go in a little bit more. So I chose to go to three stanzas, but whatever it takes to get your point across.
Panda,
Yeah,
sorry. Is it a good time to interject?
sure.
I would about how long the poem should be.
Mhm.
CSEC sometimes enjoys being, I might say being vague because I'm a teacher, but from the student's perspective, it might be, giving you some freedom to enjoy. But the idea is the you will be assessed on these 5 points, right? Relevance, organization, effectiveness, word choice, unique style. So whatever word count you decide to work with, or how many ever lines, you have to make sure you're able to fit these five criteria in your piece of writing. So if your poem is too short and there's not enough space for you to use vivid words and organize ideas and all of that, you might not be able to get the 15 marks. So I would say write enough to get the point across and satisfy these five criteria.
Mm-hmm.
Right? A poem that is too short might not be able to show the relevance of the content because the context wouldn't have been established in two or three lines, right? The effectiveness of the language comes into play when there's enough language to be effective. So if you have just a few words, how can 10 words be effective? It's an extreme example. But the more words you have, the more chances you have to be effective, put it that way. So I would say don't try to be too succinct or too poetic.
Mm-hmm.
Try to hit all of these boxes because look at it this way. If you write a poem that's one stanza, you're competing with a student who would have written a speech of 6 paragraphs,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you're both competing for 15 marks. So you want to make sure that if you're doing a poem, you're able to hold a candle to the student who would have written a story that's 10 times as long. So I would say 3 stanzas. I agree with Panda that 3 stanzas is a minimum. If you go less than that, you're in trouble. You run the risk of just not checking all the boxes that they are looking for. You need to be able to, if you're writing a poem, use a couple of poetic techniques because they're checking. Sorry, I'm going back and forth. They're checking effectiveness of effective use of language, and if you're using a poem, then poetic techniques would be a part of that effectiveness, right? They're checking organization of ideas. If you are going to write a poem, you have to make sure that the poem has in it ideas, first of all, and you can see as you go from one stanza to the next, ideas are organized in a way that makes sense. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not that if you're writing a poem, you're exempt from these rules in the criteria. You still have to find a way to satisfy the criteria even when doing a poem. So a poem might seem like the easy way out because it's the shortest thing I can think of, but if you're not good at using language very, very economically, very, very efficiently, it might not be the best choice for you, right? If you're not able to write effective poetry where you're using precise vocabulary, you're using effective poetic techniques, you might as well just write. The safer thing might be something that's actually a longer word count, like a speech. Because if I were to mark a poem for 15 marks, believe me, Panda, I'm going in line for line, word for word. I need to make sure I'm seeing devices, I'm seeing vocabulary. So I can look at your poem and I can say, all right, click clack, I'm seeing onomatopoeia. I'm seeing a stanzaic structure that makes sense. Am I seeing rhyme? I'm seeing
Almost.
I'm seeing some rhyme, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm seeing sigh. The time drags on. I'm seeing good vocabulary, good metaphors. If you're not able to do this and hit all of those notes in a poem, write something longer where you can take more time to check the boxes, right? Because a poem is short, but remember, you still have to get 15 marks whether you write 100 words or 1,000 words. It's still 15 marks. So make sure that whatever word count you choose to work with, you are able to give CXE something that is worth 15 marks. So don't just say, okay, I think the shortest thing I can write is a poem, so I'm going to do poetry. If that's the approach you take, you're not going to get 15 marks.
Mm-hmm.
If you are an effective writer and you're a good poet and you have read poetry enough where you're confident in your poetry skills, by all means, I would write a poem, definitely. But I would make sure that my poem is worth 15 marks, as Panda would have done. So don't see the poem as a shortcut. See it as a medium that has to be used as effectively as a speech or a story or essay or anything else. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And I mean, one thing I've noticed about if you perceive something as a shortcut and you do that, Usually it ends up being longer somehow in the end anyway. So if you're using a poem because you think it's a shortcut, I wouldn't really recommend that. But for me, I think it's effective. I also continue to do this in examples because it's the nearest thing to what I actually did on my exam back when I was doing it. And just because, and you never actually know where you got or dropped off marks or so, but
Mm,
this is proven in, reasonably recent time that it works, so I'm always in favor of doing that. So I
mhm,
mean, you did give a good analysis of kind of what I did here. For me, the most important thing, and what I recommend people do, relevance of content. Even the fact that they chose to put that first, relevance of content, remembering that we are thinking about one of the points in 2b above, that's going to make this your starting point of why you are writing what you are writing. So yeah, either talking about, in my case, just because I extracted things like this, and this is why I even put this asterisk by B, because this is the moment at which you trap yourself into having said that, yes, I thought I saw hidden misogyny in the workplace, or the effects of dress code on office productivity, or the need to begin training schoolish boys on their conduct toward their female peers. So now that you've said that, you get to pick one of those things and write a poem about it, write an essay about it, etc. So for me, I chose the effects of dress code on office productivity. I don't know if that was clear in this particular thing that I wrote, but I don't think on the test paper there's any place for you to highlight which issue you're talking about. And as Ms. Compton was pointing out, um, probably they're just looking for an overarching, just talk about the whole thing I was talking about here, which might make the theme something as broad as dress code. And you could just write anything on dress code, or casual dress code versus, business attire. Literally, whatever you think it is, I think you have that room though. Because I believe that they, after seeing you assess the meaningfulness, that's a word, of the stuff that went before. At this point, they just want to see what you can do in terms of creating something out of you. It's one thing to just, respond to questions in that way, but what can you do? So for me, I did this, a casual Friday. I always put the title in after because I never have that much of a plan. I just kind of jump in. There's no planning error on this, as you notice, so you can think about it. One trick that I have picked up over the years, and I saw someone execute in the actual exam room, and subsequently a lot of students have said they found it useful, is to do planning on the same page in pencil and just erase it after. You write your final thing in pen, and that worked out okay for some people. It's a tip to know if you were into it. So here went the poem, A Casual Friday. Yawn, a glance at the clock. How many minutes to go? Type a few words, click, clack, get up and stretch your back. Groan, loosen that tie. Oh wait, where did your tie even go? Left it at home, next to that. Casual dress is back. Sigh, the time drags on by. Why bother to answer the phone? Let it all go. Kring, kring. It's Casual Friday, you know. It's a poem by me. Now, for one thing, this is immediately giving government office, depending on which part of the Caribbean you are in, but I'm pretty sure it's
mm.
true all over. And so that also was just the image that made this easier for me to write. This took about maybe 10 or 15 minutes to put together. Because once you have, at least for me, some type of stimulus or impetus, you can just keep it going, right? So what I tried to do here is just make I mean, I don't know if they talk about rhyme schemes and those other format things as much, but just at a glance, you see how this looks like it matches. That's what you're going for. So the formatting that I went for is yawn, groan, sigh. Those things match in
Mhm,
terms of the stuff or the, what do you call these things? The expressions that the person is making. Yawn, for me, was meant to signify that, okay, there's a certain lazy attitude that's going on here. A glance at the clock, right? How many minutes to go? Clearly, this person, they're tired. They're thinking, hey, if we could go home now, because remember, I'm talking about same thing that the cartoon is referencing here. This lackadaisical behavior that comes in because we dress more casually, right? That's what I'm drilling down on, but in my own piece. So, type a few words, click, clack. That is highlighting low productivity. Get up and stretch your back. As if that was required at that point, you barely did any work, is my idea that's couched in there. So, this entire first stanza is about this person being at work. Hopefully, that can be picked up. And they're experiencing basically being over, basically being tired, etc. They want to get up and stretch. That's what's up. Now, loosen that tie. We're pounding a little bit on the idea that, okay, so you would have been wearing a tie, perhaps you're at work now. Where did your tie even go? You left it at home. Next to that, casual dress is back. So I'm doing a lot of things to weave together this idea here, and I'm hoping that what this may lack in stanzas or word count or whatever, it makes up for in quality because of how many things have been put together. And again, I assume that whoever's marking this has the literary experience to see what I did there, and they are the appropriate audience for even this particular thing. So I'm
Fingers
not too
crossed.
yeah, I'm not too worried about that. But at the least, again, this answers the question, and that's always my big deal, right? So side the time drags on by. Why bother to answer the phone? Let it all go. Cring cring. It's casual Friday. And so I believe that on analysis, especially after knowing what the issues were, somebody could have gotten that. And you'd have gotten 15 marks for that. Again, if you feel more comfortable with the different formats, definitely go for it. I believe that that's what's up. Right, so song basically I feel like is, yeah, poem that is a little more rhythmic and focused on that type of thing. So that's pretty cool. So that would bring me to the end of presenting this particular paper. I did want to just run through another that I haven't answered. It's just a blank paper. Um, see if I can get that here. This one is even more recent in terms of being a 2023 paper 3.
Hopefully, we can answer it together on the spot with the chat. Come up with something.
All right, and now I want to try to. Do I not have the ability to add this to the stage? Perhaps I don't. Well, Adam
Oh,
can help me. I got this
yes.
second. Yes. Here we go. So,
All right. Before you start this, I think this is a good, not really a halfway point, like maybe a three-quarter way point. But you guys in the live stream wouldn't be affected. But after the live, this the video will be up on my channel and CSEC Panda's channel in two parts. Then you would just go over to CSEC English, CSEC English's channel, my channel for part two.